In this video, I'm going to be modeling for you how we use the distributive property for multiplication. So when we use the distributive property, we are decomposing one of the factors in our multiplication equation. And the reason we're doing that is because it lets us have smaller factors instead of using larger ones. When we practice it now with our one-digit multiplication, it's going to help us in the future when you're multiplying much bigger numbers. So here I have written down kind of the general steps you take for the distributive property. You decompose, then you distribute, then you multiply, and then you add. But I'm going to be modeling that for you in a few different ways. It's important to notice that there's not one way to kind of show that you're using the distributive property, and there's not one rule for what we always should be doing for decomposing. So you'll see a little bit about that here. So my first example is 5 times 9. So now I need to decompose one of my factors. Well, when I look here, I feel like 9 is going to be tricky for me to be counting by nines, 5 groups of 9. So I'm going to actually decompose 9. I could decompose it into 1 plus 8. I could decompose it into 2 plus 7. I could decompose it into 5 plus 4. Any of those will work. But when I decompose and I see that I can decompose it into 5s, I really like to use those because I have been practicing counting by 5s for many, many years, ever since kindergarten. So I really like to try to find ways to decompose by 5 as one of the numbers, or sometimes even 2s, because 2s are easier for me to work with as well. So here I'm going to decompose 9 into 4 and 5, or 5 and 4, either one. So here I have 5 plus 4. I have now decomposed one of my factors. Now I need to distribute the other factor, the one that I didn't do anything with. I'm going to distribute this factor, the 5. So I've decomposed one, and I'm going to distribute the other factor. So I'm going to do that in one way, and there's many ways that you can show that you're distributing. This is the way that I like to do it, but I'm going to show you another way along here. So I'm going to take this 5, and I'm actually distributing the 5 times. And I'm going to do it here. 5 times 5 is the first time I've distributed. And then I'm going to distribute it over here as well. 4 times 5. And I'm just putting parentheses to help me stay a little bit organized here and to show that I've distributed it to both parts. Now, remember, we've learned with the commutative property that just because I put 5 times here and I put times 5 here, that's okay, because the commutative property has shown us that we can multiply our factors in any sequence. So now I can work better with 5 times 5 and 4 times 5. Having this 9 was a little overwhelming for me. So now I'm going to use some strategies that I know to find my products for these smaller multiplication equations. So next step is multiplying what I have. So 5 times 5. I'm going to use my repeated addition. You could use equal groups. You could use an array. Whatever works for you. So I have my 5 groups of 5. Now I'm going to count by 5s, or I could group by 10s. So I have 10, 20, 25. Now I need to multiply over here as well. 4 times 5. So I'm going to make 4 groups of 5. And now I have 10 and 10 is 20. So now I need to add these smaller products together to get my final product. So 25 plus 20, well, that's 25 plus 2 10s would get me 4 10s and 5 left over. Now, I know a lot of you can look at 5 times 9 and you've been maybe practicing it for a while, but practicing the distributive property now with smaller factors is going to help you when you have much larger 2-digit and 3-digit factors. Let me show you another example of how you could show the distributive property. So here I have 8 times 3, and I'm going to actually use an array, and this proves really well why the distributive property works and how it works. So here I have 8 times 3, and that 8 is a really big factor for me. So I'm going to actually try to decompose that. Here are my 8s, showing the 8s. So I'm actually going to decompose it and break it up a little bit. So I could break it up into 4 and 4, 5 and 3, 6 and 2. I really like the 5 and 3 because I like to work with 5s because I've been skip counting by 5s for many years. But I also like the 4 and the 4 because it's going to be giving me equal parts there. So if I decompose here, I now have 4 times 3 and 4 times 3. So I have decomposed. Now for this part, it's really hard to see the distributive part of it, but it's letting you get those smaller groups. This is actually proving to you why the distributive property works. So here, you'll notice that I've kept the 3 the same. I still have that factor in my equation, but I have broken apart the 8 into 4 and 4, which is similar here. I had the 5 in both of my smaller equations, but I had decomposed and broken apart the 9 into 5 and 4. So here now I'm going to find my product for 4 times 3. So I could make equal groups of 4 groups of 3. 3, 6, 9, 12. And I'm actually going to notice that 4 times 3 again. So I could just use that again and say, oh, this is also 12 because it's the exact same equation. And now I'm going to add those smaller products together to get my final product. So 12 plus 12 would be 24. So here you're noticing that I took my array of 8 times 3 and I broke it into 4 times 3 and 4 times 3, found those products, and then added them back together to get the final product of 8 times 3. I'm going to show you one more example of how your third grader might show that they've distributed. So 7 times 5, I'm going to decompose one of my factors. I really like 5, so I'm going to leave that one alone, and I'm going to break apart the 7. Again, I like to look for how I can get factors of 5, but you don't have to do that. I'm going to break mine into 2 and 5. So now I'm going to write a multiplication equation where I am multiplying each of these numbers by the 5. So I'm going to do my 2 times 5 and my 5 times 5. So I've pulled both of these and made them my new factors and then distributed this to those equations. So now 2 times 5, oh, there I am. I can count by those 5s. 2 groups of 5 is 10. And now I have 5 times 5. That lets me count by 5s. So that is 25. And then there I have 25, and I'm adding a 10, gets me to 35. So here are just a few ways that you can use the distributive property. Again, practicing it now with those smaller factors and being really fluent with it now is going to help you when you are multiplying much bigger 2-digit and 3-digit numbers. So use some of these ideas when you are solving your problem for homework tonight and writing about how to use that distributive property. Think about those steps. You need to decompose. Why did you choose to decompose that number? Then you need to distribute that other factor, multiply your new smaller equations, and then add those smaller products to get your final product.